But one trend that we can kind of see coming is a move away from mining rigs to something more like a mining server rack or a wall or something way bigger. Have you guys been looking at each individually, maybe looking at whether there is going to be an iteration in what an actual mining setup looks like, and have you seen anything interesting there? Chrissy, I see you nodding your head. Maybe you want to jump in first.
Um, it's very interesting to me that folks that were in the 2012 era might remember companies like Cloud Hashing or KNC Miner. They actually did produce Bitcoin servers. So, standard server racks full of Bitcoin ASICs. That used to be the form factor people adopted. And then we found out quite quickly that it wasn't really efficient. Um, part of the part of the benefits of the ASIC form factor is that air pressure. So you can do some insane things with your data center and your CFD just because of the form factor of those ASIC devices. It is more efficient. And you can use all that air pressure to efficiently, cool your data center. The traditional server form factor doesn't work too well. Now, ASIC walls are pretty much the standard build nowadays. So, you see these 120-foot high or even higher walls where it's just ASICs stacked up and up, and you need a forklift, or not a forklift, sorry, a scissor lift to triage some of the top machines. That's like standard mining farm build out nowadays. Um, there have been some companies that even today are experimenting with like immersion tanks for just Bitcoin ASICs. It can make sense if you're intending on never modifying or changing the ASIC for 2 to 3 years, sometimes 4. But most investors will want to change out their equipment. I've said Bitcoin many, many times. Um, so yeah, that's definitely something. It's just interesting to me that in the original days, that was the standard form factor. We moved away from that for a reason. Um,
Yeah, I think a big difference between the traditional data center that is structured that way, and I mean it's intuitive for when ASICs became a blossoming business that seems to be the intuitive path to think about. I think a big difference here is that the ASICs themselves are obviously commodity, and they're also a financial derivative of the Bitcoin itself. Um, so I think the big trade-off here is obviously how much you spend upfront. The capex is a kosher word now, right? So
Approved.
anyway, yeah. So I think it depends on who is spending this money, and I think up to this point, a lot of the data center, the people who spend a large amount of money on making the data centers highly efficient, these are not necessarily the people who are self-mining. These are people who are uh, they're hosting, right? They're offer colocation services. The miners who are just mostly just purchasing the machines. Um, so I think as uh, as industrialization moves further, as more people own the data center and self mine at the same time, I think the people then they have more incentive to invest upfront.
So the way that this has kind of imposed to me, and I'm learning while I'm listening to everybody, is that really there's an efficiency gain by having these rigs so small and so kind of compartmentalized to some extent. Why haven't we seen legacy data centers move to that same model? Is there something holding them back?
we have
We have.
we actually have, yeah. There's so if you're deep in the HPC world, there's actually a few data centers that run cute little FPGA rigs in the same form factor now. Trust me, the world is looking at ASIC design. So whoever has a patent on that, if anyone does, they're going to be cashing in on some royalties. So Xilinx is actively exploring that form factor. I can throw that out there. And there's, I know Cirrus One has been also experimenting with that form factor. So folks are actively looking at it. It's great for, there's a hedge fund here in Bellevue that's actually been experimenting with shoving GPUs in that form factor because it is incredibly efficient and they can cram like 3 or 4 of those little shells with, 2 to 3 GPUs each, and they can shove it into a closet versus, having to get a rack in the office and then have, the networking, and it's just not very efficient for them. So folks are looking into this. I think the advantage you really, really get from the ASIC form factor is the cost. An average chassis is going to run you, oh geez, Elsa would know better than I do, but like $25 to $30 like max for the best top of the line chassis at scale. And if you go into the server space, your chassis is going to end up running $120. So it's really cost. And oftentimes it's not like, the server can just provide more space for hardware. Most of the traditional HPC servers are kind of capped at 4 to 6 GPUs, unless they're specially made for 8 or 16, and then your costs start adding up. So folks are looking into that. I'm experimenting with it at my day job as well.
I think the point that you made earlier is also relevant in terms of airflow. I think that's one of the main advantages. Just the amount of static pressure that you can generate with the 38mm fan form factor, and that ability to direct that in an extruded aluminum tube is a lot better than in a large rectangular case where airflow is it's a lot more difficult to easily cool all the components in just the ratios they need to be. Part of the reason why that's so simple for an ASIC is that you just have this really consistent thermal load where every chip is just constantly outputting its wattage. Unlike traditional server where you've got multiple components that are ramping up and down and may have different differing airflow requirements, and you've got volatile memory, and you've got long-term storage, and all of those have different temperature sensitivities versus ASIC chips. Like those are just going to run hot, and as long as they have new airflow, you're good.
Yeah, I think that water cooling can solve this problem to make the ASIC miners to be more like a data center and more like a servers. Yeah. Actually, we are working on designing some water cooling system, and we want to design its the mining machines more like a server. And then that in the near future that you could to make it to that put it so the mining farms more like a data center by using the water cooling system.
I remember talking to the Layer 1 guys, and they talked about how some manufacturers should just custom make chips for water cooling or immersion cooling systems. Is that something that WhatsMiner is doing?
I'm sorry, cut chips.
Is WhatsMiner making chips specially for immersion cooling setups?
Yeah. So the immersion cooling, there are 2 ways. And one is some liquid oil, some special oil to the immersion, and the other way is the water cooling. So I know that there are many customers that are very interesting to fix the manners and adjust this into the immersion system cooling. So that would be really interesting, and also we see that potential. So we are if we're going to design a plan for all the customers, so maybe the water cooling is that we're working with. Yeah.
Just so I'm clear, water cooling is different than immersion in mineral oil, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I've never heard of an ASIC board that's water cooled. That would be crazy.
Yeah, I think we're gonna to launch some samples next month. Yeah, about the water cooling. Yeah.
Wow.
Never heard of water cooled either. I've only heard of the immersion solvent stuff. So it's always some patented stuff.
Yeah, I watched videos about Jesse, and he did the immersion system. That's really cool. Yeah, it's a yeah.
Yeah, Jesse, what do you have to say about this?
My Bitcoin hot tub.
Yeah.
I think that's the best use case for immersion cooling.
Yeah.
Was that water cooled?
I mean, well, it's directly immersion cooled. I mean, you could do I've thought about doing a water cooled one. The biggest thing, you just have to make a water block for it. Like, water is a far better heat transfer fluid than oil. You're at, depending on the viscosity of your oil, you're at like a fifth the viscosity of your, your typical oil that you'd use for immersion cooling. And you're also at about 5 times the thermal conductivity, as well as higher specific heat capacity. It's just a far better heat transfer fluid. But the thing is, like, for Bitcoin ASICs, it doesn't really matter that much. Like, we're not running at crazy heat densities with ASICs. Like, you're running at much lower frequencies just for pure economic reasons. If like, heat output isn't the limiting factor on where we're setting ASIC chip frequency.